ladies, it's exciting to be here. I love talking about menstrual health. I don't think I've talked about menstrual health in architecture in the same sentence, but hey, there's a first time for everything.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode on Design to Connect. I'm here with Khadija again in yet another rainy day in Milan. I'm really tired of this, but it's okay. How are you?
Good. Also complain about the weather as you, but we'll get through it at some point, I hope. Hopefully.
Before the winter comes again, hopefully, and we will see the sun. And today, if you already seen the title of this episode, you already know that we are going to talk about menstruation and architecture and natural cycles. And you might have been thinking how those two, all these topics connect with each other. So in this episode, we want to show you that the world is much more interconnected than we think. We really like to put our world in these very separate boxes that they're very clean and they don't, impact each other. But today we want to learn together, brainstorm together how all these topics can relate to each other, and also compare and contrast a little bit, like how our bodies work, how nature works, how nature grows and develops, and all these things, and kind of compare it to how we as humans decided to grow and develop and build and create things. So it might get philosophical at some points, our talk, but it's going to be interesting. I'm sure it's going to be very, very, very interesting.
Yeah, and I have the pleasure to introduce our guest today. So we have with us Dinara Mukh, and she is, just to be precise, she's a women's health coach and a TEDx speaker. She helps women to tune in into their bodies by living in harmony with their menstrual cycle to improve their health and enhance creativity and productivity. Hello, Dinara, and thank you so much to be here with us.
Hi, ladies, it's exciting to be here. I love talking about menstrual health. I don't think I've talked about menstrual health in architecture in the same sentence, but hey, there's a first time for everything.
Yeah. Always. And first thing first, and how are you? And we have this question now. We'll see how it goes with you. We would like to know about you, but how would you define yourself without talking about what we call, the productive job?
Without the job, well, I'm Dinara and I'm wonderful, thank you. And just like in Milan, which is crazy, I'm based in the south of France and it's also rainy today, which is insane because the weather has been absolutely something else this year. And I am, if I were to describe myself without what I do, I am. People were calling me period girl because I'm the girl that sort of talks about periods, and I'm the person that helps women to fall in love with their periods, because one of the journeys that I've had is really disliking my female body, being completely disconnected through it, and looking at the very normal function that the female body performs as something that is foreign, unusual, and I didn't like. And actually, with the process of discovering and learning about myself, I've realized just how powerful my female body truly is. And just by knowing it, how much better it puts me in control of my health, makes me CEO of my health, makes me help advocate for people. And since I was able to see such an incredible changes learning about my body, I started to talk more and more about it to as many other women to help them to get closer in touch with their bodies. So I get a period girls and a girls that makes people fall in love with their periods.
Amazing. Love that. And I feel sometimes our passions are so interconnected to what we are and to what we do that is, it's not as easy as it looked to really understand all those layers. But thank you for your answer. Thank you.
Of course.
Yeah. And if you wanted to now define yourself with the productive job, what is it that you do?
Yeah, so I am a women's health coach, and specifically I focus on hormones and nutrition when I work with women. And I help women restore hormonal balance to that way they could, typically the women that I see are usually the ones that are exhausted, tired, trying to do all the things, and then finding themselves either waking up, already starting their days off being tired and trying to push their feet through, or get to a certain point of their menstrual cycle and realize, why am I feel like a superwoman one day and then feel like completely exhausted, self-doubting mess the other day? And I help them make connection and understanding that actually the things that are driving a lot of our behaviors, the way we look, feel, and show up in the world through our hormones, and specifically the menstrual cycles, which is how our main hormones fluctuate. So it's sort of, and I help women to reconnect with their bodies. And oftentimes we resolve things like low energy is a big one, but it's also crazy PMS, painful periods, any sort of delayed periods, late periods, and also women that are trying to, for the first time, become a mothers and step into a different womanhood. And maybe also working with women that just have become mothers and now their bodies are completely messed up because they have gone through such a crazy process of growing a baby. So my job is sort of do everything in between, but to help you really reconnect with your body, and oftentimes through understanding how it works, but also through nutritional changes, because the role that diet plays in our health is just so massive. And we are lucky, both you guys and me, living in Europe and in Italy and France, where there is such an appreciation for ingredients. And I still see people not being able to nourish their bodies in the way that's appropriate. And of course, in countries like in North America, which is where I'm from, a lot of our food is just so not nourished in the way that it really should be in order to make the female body thrive. So I basically help women to connect the dots and feel and look better in their bodies.
Amazing. And was there like a specific story in your own life that made you passionate about all of
Yeah.
this?
Yeah, so I used to have for many years, I think as many women, sort of through my 20s, extremely painful periods. And to the point that one day I actually had to call an ambulance because it was so bad. And once the ambulance arrived, they sort of just looked at me and they're like, oh, this is just your period pain. And I really didn't like this whole just your period pain. But they said, if you wanted to resolve it, you're going to have to go to the doctors and then see what they can do. Of course, I went to the doctors and then I walked out with this magical pill, as birth control, a contraceptive, to help me with my pain, thinking that all of my problems will be resolved. And I started to take the pill. And unfortunately, not only my problems weren't resolved, but I started to develop many other symptoms. Like my hair started to fall out, my libido went down, and now that I understand how birth control works in the way that it shuts down our communication between our brain and our ovaries, stopping us from ovulating. So by shutting down a major reproductive system in the female body through the pills, it's not weird to me why I started to experience a lot of those symptoms. Back then, however, I was extremely confused. And another thing that was happening simultaneously is I was gaining a lot of weight. And of course, in your 20s, as a girl, we do get obsessed slightly, unhealthily, body image questions that go off. So I was gaining weight, my periods were painful, but I was also mentally not quite there. I knew it had to do with the pill and sort of coming off of it. The pain came back, but then a friend of mine recommended that I read on menstrual cycles. And for somebody who just rejected their period for their entire life, and sort of at one point I said, I wish I was a boy because of how much I hated this menstrual cycles. And just someone who rejected their female body for so long, I was started to get really interested, read the menstrual cycle book, didn't think it's going to do much for me, but it actually blew my world because I've realized that my menstrual cycle is so much more than just absence and presence of my period. And it really showed me that my body changes every single week from one week to the next. I'm not the same. I don't show up the same in the world, nor should I expect the same level of productivity and put such a level of pressure. And once I was able, sometimes we kind of, because as humans, we're quite cerebral. We need to sort of understand logically how things make sense. We have this wisdom of our bodies, but the world that we live in, we often lead with our brains. And once I understand sort of logically what makes sense, then I was able to connect with the femininity, with my female body. And then the pain disappeared, which is crazy. And I was like, oh my gosh, I've changed nutrition, I've changed some lifestyle changes, prioritized my sleep, and welcomed my first pain-free period in my 30s. which is crazy. And it was just so, yeah, it was so lovely. And then I was like, oh my gosh, I've got the secret to the universe. I must tell everyone. And as I started to talk to other women, I realized that women just don't really understand how their bodies work. And that's when I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to get educated, get certifications, and start actually helping women. And then I did a TED talk, which is how you guys found me. And the TED talk is called Menstrual Cycle is Your Superpower, where I talk about my journey and specifically, but more so practical for women, exactly what to do to align with their bodies and their cycles to feel more in tune.
Amazing.
Thank you.
And
Yeah.
sorry.
No, go on, go on.
And just latching on something you were saying. You were saying you are a bit cerebral, but I feel that everybody always need to understand, what's the science behind it, what are the mechanism, and sometimes we don't feel really to just, be in our bodies and trust them. So how do you manage when someone comes to you and says, I need to understand XYZ, and then you are trying more to latch on, in a more holistic approach, probably? Because as you're saying, I also read so many books, and sometimes it's just about, sitting quietly in a room and trying to understand what's happening in my body.
Yeah, and I love that question. Well, one of the things is like as we could kind of we're different learners, some of us, like some of us sort of like to hear, read, and feel things, and most of us are sort of, as you said, we like to, especially in the Western world, we like to really understand the
Yeah.
things through science. It seems more legitimate that way, and a lot of the stuff that I do teach is very much deeply based in science. There's a lot of research on to say, I mean, it's a fact how much our hormones fluctuate. So what I typically do is we understand it from the science standpoint, how the hormones move, and all of this stuff is very cerebral and very logical. And once you understand, but we don't need to understand the depth of the science. I think one of the best things that we can do with both the science and the thing that bridges it and makes us really understand it is the stories and the things that make it relatable. So the way I talk about menstrual cycle is in the context of 4 seasons. So we've got our inner winter, which is when we kind of want to sit at home and not see the world, which is our period. Then we go through our inner spring, we go into our ovulation, which is our inner summer, when we're the most outgoing. And then we go into our inner autumn or inner fall, where we sort of, this is the PMS sort of time for many women. It can be quite rocky, and and as kind of understanding from the specific words of what happens to the hormones, understanding it through the story, through the seasons. And then we implement with women, I implement certain foods and certain nutrition, and within almost certain lifestyles, and almost within 2 3, like within a couple of weeks, women see their energy come up. Within about a cycle or two, people start seeing that their PMS went down, and within 2 cycles we usually see that the period pain goes away. And when you see that, when you kind of understood it cerebrally, and then you implementing the things, and then you actually feel the body, it's kind of like this electricity connection where you connect it and it all makes sense. But it does kind of do it step by step, because it does, in order to get through to people, the entrance is always to explain the science of it, to make sure that it clicks in the head. And I think that's the seasons, the story things helps to draw that parallel.
Yeah. I really love the idea of seasons. That I
Yeah.
don't know if you were the one that introduced it, but it really helped me, and like also communicated with my husband and all and the people around live like now also with Khadija we are saying now I'm in my winter, now in summer. So I think it really helps it. And we were thinking that when we look at like the menstrual cycle of women and how you also connected it to season, like everything that has been made by nature is created based on a cycle.
Yeah.
So things are cyclical, they're moving, they're always changing, they're not this static, not changeable things. While the way that our cities are designed, especially in the modern society, the building is a very static thing. It doesn't interact with its environment. It doesn't change through the seasons. It's always, especially, if you look at the modern glass buildings, like they look always the same. They don't have any connection with their surroundings. And I often think like, there are a lot of people that they don't feel belonging in cities, and a lot of that is because of of course, because of loneliness and how our cities, are making us kind of isolated in these building structures that we are creating. But I think it also, we don't feel belonging because we are not like the same material or way of building, like the spaces that we live in, they are not the same as how we work or how nature work. Like it's very disconnected from human nature. So I think it's really important that we kind of realize that, and like see that our living environment should also be moving and always changing as we are, like as our bodies are, as nature is. So I really love the ideas of seasons and how you connect to nature. But I wanted to also go to the idea that you say periods don't have to be painful.
Yeah.
Because the first time that I heard you say that, it really blew my mind, because it I mean, how?
Yeah.
So I think because also, like as women, but in general in our society, we've been taught from a very young age to kind of disassociate from our bodies. So if you have a painful period, you put a painkiller in your body. You go to school, you go to work. We see even the advertisements of pads. People are horseback riding. I don't know why. Like
Cartwheeling.
and she's so happy apparently, because we always have to be happy. So I feel like the same teaching or education that we give to women to kind of disconnect from their bodies and not see their own pain, of course we give it to men in other way. And the way that this is collectively impacting our society is that when I have a pain in my body and I don't care about it, when I see pain in nature, also I don't care about it. I can disassociate very easily, and I can focus on my productive job, because that's the important thing. And I think one reason that we cannot see the climate crisis, we cannot feel the pain of the planet and the animals and also the wars, is because we first disassociated from the pain in our own body. And I think this is very much connected also with the way that we develop. So I wanted to ask you all of this to ask you to start, how can we practically connect and feel the pain? Because I think it's very hard for us. So feel it, be in our body, and let ourselves be.
Yeah. Wow. I think you said so many interesting things there that I was just like, where is she gonna go? What's she gonna open up next? Love that. Wow.
Welcome
This
to
is
our
the things
brains.
that I never thought about, but it definitely never thought about it, but like it definitely makes sense. And when you kind of talked about the buildings and having different seasons and feeling connected to it and feeling loneliness, it is very true. Because I remember living in Vancouver, a lot of buildings are very modern and they're very like just stand up in like a very glass city, and it's kind of designed that way. And of course, now living in France, in Nice in particular, and it has such a strong influence of Italy. So we've got a lot of colorful buildings here, which does attract a lot of people because of the colors, and many artists came here because they do get attracted to colors. And I also think about one of my favorite cities, one of my favorite countries that I just love to travel to is Mexico in general, just because it is, once again, when I would go from Vancouver into Mexico or into Nice, it's just your soul is singing because you see more sunshine, but particularly you see different colorful buildings that are evoking variety of emotions, which is incredible. And also the buildings, some of the ones that I can think about here, there is my favorite wine bar that has this stunning sort of long tree sort of floating down it. And I spent a lot of days in that bar. I discovered it in the winter. I spent a lot of time there, and I do love wine. I'm in France, and it's just seeing a lot of this sort of vines hanging in, but they were just so dry and just you could see it's winter. And now when we went there like a couple of days ago, it's just a different building. It looks so summery, it looks so flourishing, it looks with flowers. And now we just had the jasmine flowers bloom, which you felt that spring. And now once you go in the summer, it's just warmth and covered in the sun. And like I keep going back to that place because of that life within that building. And I know that many buildings try to build the green walls, and I don't know whether it's the maintenance that comes back to, maybe it eats at some materials, but I do wish that we had a bit more of that, because I think that is an ultimate way of kind of showing the different sides to it. And then in other ways is oftentimes buildings have rooftops, and sometimes you see like big yellow umbrellas open up maybe in the summer, and once again it kind of gives it that life, and you know that changes, it's very much changes in the winter. And of course there's similar changes throughout the daytime, in particular in the colorful cities like Mexico, Nice, of course Italy, just like the different sunshine elements on it. And I sometimes walk around the building specifically for sunset, just to see that sort of golden light that's in the evening. It is very interesting. I never thought about it, but the reason that I love it here so much is largely buildings, because I do look at it so much. And if we did more, brought that in, rather than like places like modern cities, like where I was from in Vancouver, which just didn't like it because it's just so bright. And we've built this brand new building in Nice nearby the train station that now is very modern, and it's like, it's our modern hotel, and so many people complain about it and just come to me. That's all I hear about, people just saying, how is this, how did this get passed? Like, it doesn't change in the color, it doesn't change in anything, and it's like, it really doesn't add anything. And you can see this like almost anger and annoyance in people's mind over the building, and I was kind of like, who cares? But now that you talk about it, I'm like, yeah, it is actually really weird, and it does evoke certain emotions. So I think if we can really play with the seasons, and particularly the greenhouses, maybe if, as we do the trees and bringing that in, I think it would be just so, so beautiful. And when it comes to sort of pain that you talk about, it's really interesting how we, as you said, don't see the climate because of the pain changes. As women, particularly, I mean, the patriarchy ruled the world for so long, and there's so many unfortunate messages that we have been taught that we just sort of adopted as our own. And socialization, sort of something that people say, as a kid, we're born with no beliefs, and then a society tells us to be a good girl, don't make a fuss when you've got a period, don't talk bad to people. So we sort of adopt these beliefs as they're our own. And I think really questioning it in ourselves, why am I accepting the pain as normal? Why am I doing this, and kind of breaking in these patriarchal structures that we have created that are really hurting the females' bodies. And I think if we have similar conversations when it comes to buildings, and being like, why, like, who said that we have to have glass buildings that are modern right now? Why aren't we bringing the facades that are similar to the ones that we have older in Nice? Is it sort of like money that it comes into? Is it better that it will be structurally more colorful for people? Is there any ways that we can bring up color? Like, I think the whole glass thing really came in, and we even seeing it in modern, in like the older places, but it doesn't fit in, and it just doesn't really have it doesn't have the same, but yeah, it's modern, maybe that's like the coolness of it, but over time it doesn't change. There's no reflection of color, there's no plan, so it does kind of kill it a little bit in that sense. So it is just like with our bodies, questioning the sort of things that we've always thought as normal, questioning it within the architecture.
Yeah. I feel that sometimes, as you were saying, people is telling you about how this building is not working, and sometimes as designer we think that people don't know how the space work for them and how a place could be. But actually, as you were talking, something we always work on is what we call the city at eye level. So really understanding how this facade work, because public space is not just the street, which is now just jammed with cars, but we'll get there as well. It's all the thing that happens in on the ground floor. And there is this this theory from Richard Sennett that also speaks about working and designing for incompleteness, because sometimes we are so obsessed by having something that is finished and done, while, as you were saying, even having an umbrella that is opening and closing changed completely the mood of a space. And another, oh, it's raining, sorry. Too many changes here. And actually, I wanted to speak about water, so maybe that's the reason. And there are spaces now, and they're square, that are used for football or sport fields, But actually, what the designer do, instead of saying, okay, we need to remove water when it's raining, is to transform them either in storages for water, or even in winter they can become ice skating field. Is this kind of way of changing the space
Yeah.
in a way that is adaptive more than trying to
Static thing.
static, as you know, again, as our body are not like this, so why we should build in this way.
Yeah.
And I think you already touched on it, but are there spaces that you feel are, for you as well, in your experience, more adapt for the different phases in your period,
Yeah.
sorry,
Is
in
there
your
phases
menstrual
that adapt to
cycle?
different? Yeah.
Like,
Repeat that again. So, is there phases within my cycle that I notice that I have to adapt to them?
Yeah, if
the
there are spaces that are better in one phase instead of another phase.
Ah, like the physical spaces.
Yes,
yeah.
physical spaces.
Oh, I love that. Um, Let me think.
Yeah, of course.
Um,
Because I
well,
don't know either,
actually,
so
So
I'm
we are
asking you.
asking you.
I love that. So, if we kind of break down the cycle, I think
Yeah.
that will kind of make more sense. So, in my, and yeah, definitely, because I just recently had, there was a festival here just on the weekend, a couple weekends ago, that I've invited my best friend and my sister. They came from London and they stayed with us. And it's the beautiful, sort of sunshiny festival. And it's kind of the beach part of it was right by the beach with like white sand and like the drinks. And it was just really beautiful and very sunny. And I remember standing there and being like, this is so cool. And I was just coming up to my period in 3 days. And I was like, this is so cool. I just wish I was in my ovulatory phase, that I would actually hang out here. Like I would, because it's the season that we feel internally very much reflects not just our mood, how we show up, but also the places that we'd like to hang out in. Like, for example, in the winter during your period, I don't want to hang out in the sunny square. I want to be somewhere where it's like cozy with maybe like the chestnut couches and just like sort of a bit of a darker space, a bit of a calmer, not as much light irritation and like quiet, dead quiet, because your sensory is just so elevated oftentimes at the beginning of your period. So somewhere not like a crazy busy market. And then once my period stops and I'm entering my follicular phase or my inner spring, usually this is for women where we have the most amount of energy, but also the way that our brain works at that time and the way that hormones affect our brain, we're more willing to learn things or implement new habits. So every single time I've started new gym membership or some new restaurant that I've tried had always been in my follicular phase, because the brain is just looking for something new. So that's when I love going to the markets, looking at different things, just browsing things and observing things. And after that, we enter in my ovulatory phase, which is our inner summer, which is the time when women are typically the most very communicative. We want to talk to people, we want to hear the stories. So markets are usually fantastic for me at this time. Big, busy squares, ideally for like aperos around 4 or 5 o'clock, just so you can just chat, 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 chat. Like those are the places that really excite me. And then from moving from that time into the luteal phase, which is sort of our inner fall time, it's sort of that interesting change where you feel super extroverted to very introverted. And that's when I'd want to switch to places like libraries, to stuff that is a bit more quiet, where you allow to contemplate on things, where I can just focus, sort of be on my own, maybe in a quieter gardens, to just read a book by myself and somewhere be a bit quieter. And for women during that time, once I switch from my ovulatory into my luteal phase, so going from my summer into fall, another thing that I often notice is dust. It's like all of a sudden everything just seems dusty, and it's just the way you as
I
well. Yeah, you
just
like
did
all of a
it.
sudden, if I want to clean, I'm like, oh, there we go, in luteal phase. So in the places that are cleaner, because otherwise the oxygen would drive me crazy if it does get too dusty. Some were nicer, but some were quieter. I think I'm one of those people that's quite affected by the sounds. I can be quite sensitive to super loud and quiet sounds. So I think that's, as I'm talking about it, these are the sort of places that draw me more forward, the things that more sensory. Perhaps I typically reduce them. But yeah, that's
Yeah.
interesting. I definitely shift between the two and feel the difference. And because I see the world through the lens of the menstrual cycle, because this is what I do for work. So that's just, I'm like, okay, I'm in this phase. And all of my friends, there's a
they
certain
know
way that I
it.
change in the way that I communicate or where I want to be. People usually know which phases I'm in just because I talk about it so much. And I do think that if everybody starts to look at the world through the lens of menstrual cycle and just kind of see their bodies, we can be less shy about asking for our needs to be met, maybe to be expressed a bit more. Because once we're confident here, like it's really, really not not afraid. When we say about like, oh, I worry about what other people, it oftentimes I worry about what I'm going to tell myself when this happens. And if we're all that open, that I think we can just create better communications and hang out in a place as being respectful of each other's needs.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now I know why I hate dust in certain
You
periods.
see,
Yeah.
there's a reason. You're not alone.
I'm not alone. Oh, this is amazing.
And
Crazy.
Yeah. I was cleaning yesterday.
Ah, there we go.
Yeah. So now I know.
now it all makes sense.
Yeah, it does, absolutely.
It's satisfactory as well. Don't clean
Yeah.
during
Oh, yeah.
ovulatory phase. You just want to be out.
True. True.
Yeah, yeah.
That's what I did. Oh my God, it all makes sense now.
Your life makes sense now.
I know. See, when you asked me about how do you get through cerebral people, you kind of click the senses and then you're like, now I feel it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to like, you get to feel those things and you get more aware of it. And then it's just double whammy. It just becomes so much more awareness piece.
Yeah. It could be so cool when we are also thinking about the type of functions that we need in a city to kind of be inspired by menstrual cycles. Because, like, for example, you share that the spring is for initiation. So it could be cool that we had the spaces, you know, that people could go in, talk to each other, start projects, you know, work with each other. When there are spaces for focus, for example, even in the public space, if we had the spaces that were not only the library that you have to, you know, go and read a book, but, you know, it could be interesting if we were inspired by these different needs of women that I think men definitely have them too,
totally.
in different ways. Because like I feel that our public spaces for years have been focused on very certain functions and needs, and it hasn't changed ever. So it could be interesting to kind of just introduce new functions because we have different needs during the cycles, and it's not, you know, only going to a mall or to a market or to a cafe, you know, because these are the type of spaces that we are offered in a city. But it could be cool to, I don't know, have more options, different functions, and therefore different buildings for them.
Yeah,
It could be interesting to look at that. So another thing we wanted to ask you, it again goes to that circularity and the cycle and all those things of how women's bodies are. We wanted to create another comparison between how our bodies grow and also how nature grow in comparison to how development field or urban development is seen in the society, at least for now, because like in nature everything is a full circle, like nothing is waste, the production, the consumption, it's all circular. So kind of the economy of nature is circular, but our way of doing things is not that only our, you know, economy is linear, so we just produce and create waste. But the way that we see our development is also very linear. So having these ideas of the sky is the limit, so we just produce forever and there is no limit, you know, we have to grow forever. As we know, like in our bodies, it's not like that. Like it's not that you consume a million amount of food and you say, okay, the sky is the limit and this is how I'm gonna grow forever. It's not natural. So if you could kind of explain how our body kind of develops and grows, which is a little bit different from how our development develops and grows. So through these cycles, how do we move from one phase of life to another and we grow from one phase to another, which is not this linear uprise thing, but it's a little bit different, if you can explain that.
Yeah, for sure. So I think for women in particular, we do have, not only do we have, we're so cyclical in so many different ways, but we also have different seasons of life that we go through, which is like we start as girls where things are just so new, everything is amazing. And then we go into puberty, which is when we sort of completely learn completely different things about each other. When we start, our breasts are growing, our boobs are growing, and we sort of, our bum is growing, our body is changing, and we start to think things, and like we get more excited, we libidos goes up, and then from there we typically transition into the reproductive years, which is the years where usually woman comes really gets to know herself with the menstrual cycle, and it's a lot of schools and a lot of learnings and early careers, and we sort of develop and get to know our body as such. And once we finally sort of nailed that structure, then our body once again changes, and then we enter into we're ready for the motherhood. So then we enter the motherhood phase, and we sort of go through this womanhood stages consistently throughout the motherhood. Then as we literally our brains change, they shrink, they grow in size as we completely change once we give birth, and our body is once again not the same. And then from there we finish that phase, and then we go into the phase of perimenopause, which is sort of that 4 to 10 years gap where we sort of have a period, we're kind of retiring and going off the period, and it's sort of once again the female body changes, and in the way that our hormones express ourselves, we do feel quite different, certainly more wiser, but definitely at the time also extremely emotional, which is the phase that is quite interesting, because I think for so long women are taught to be this good girl, fit within the societal structures, don't be crazy. And then for many women in perimenopause, the rage tends to come out, and just like this anger and the stuff that they maybe tried to reserve up until now, then it starts to come off, and then we go into menopause, and we really get to this wise women ages, which I think sometimes women have this thing where we're afraid of aging, when I actually really want to rebrand that and make it more exciting to welcome these phases, because it's truly inevitable, whether it's with buildings or with aging. But if we're going to hate that period, it's just going to create such a miserable half of your life. So actually preparing your body and really appreciating every phase of it. And as we sort of enter into this wise women ages, which are around 50, 55, we sort of feel a bit more ourselves. And then we go into the sort of menopausal age. And then we go into this post-menopausal age, which is when we enter more maybe in our grandmother phases, and the completely different womanhood goes in. And one of the things that we do really have the parallel throughout it, it is the same woman that goes through the phases, and that there is a certain wisdom that carries through each and different phase of the womanhood that we can pass to different generations. On my podcast, I have a podcast called Feel Better, Be Better. I recently had a woman who actually does specific practices that they would do this initiation practices going from one phase of womanhood to the next. And she creates this retreat where she invites women of different phases, like women that, primarily the women that are sort of in reproductive ages, in early 20s, mothers, women through perimenopause, grandmothers, and she invites them all in the same thing. And she holds different ceremonies and initiations between them, communicating and kind of talking to each other. It's actually going to be held in Italy, communicating and talking to each other. Exactly. And they kind of talk to each other, and they kind of give each other the wisdom of how it transfers. And she kind of dates it back to the ancient rituals of how back in the day, as the woman would have her period, we would have this sort of celebration for her, like, yay, amazing. Whether today, when you have a period, you sort of, if you're lucky that your mom talked to you about it, you kind of, all right, or you're just terrified looking for a tissue to kind of hide it in. But I think if we sort of understood both in the architectural standpoint, and so that like everything is meant to change and evolve into something new, and each of the thing has its beautiful thing that comes with it, rather than hate the fact that buildings get old. Like, it's just not inevitable. Like, I live in a building that's so old, and like the pipes are just not quite there. But rather than destroying the whole building, maybe we can just fix something, add something new, and bring in the new life to it, but to honor every single womanhood phase that we go through. So I think that's the phases that women go through. And I think both physically, brain-wise, wisdom-wise, emotionally, spiritually, we're not the same as we go through every womanhood stages. And I do think that if we add a bit more sparkle into it and sort of rebrand it, you may say, and just kind of add the beauty thing to every single phase, it would be a really wonderful thing, because our bodies evolve, and it's a beautiful thing. It's not a bad thing. Like, we all get born in order to die. All buildings are get built knowing that at some point they'll probably get destroyed. Like, it's just the life of it, but truly celebrating every phase of it as it lasts, with this sort of more zest to it.
I'm gonna take that in.
Yes, same.
Yeah, I think the womanhood conversation is really beautiful if we like really start to think about it that way, rather than think about it as this temporary stage. The amount of women that are terrified of aging, it's just so unfortunate. It's like, yo, it's just the only way to stop it is to go, and it's just it's not worth it.
That's
To
not.
go.
Yeah, and it's like, why would you want to do that? It's just so much easier to really appreciate it.
Yeah, true. Yeah, and then on the other side, you have the conversation of being mother as it's that the aim and the only aim of the period and of that being there,
Yeah.
and yeah, so many things.
Well, that's another, again, thing that taught by patriarchy, that you have
Yeah,
to be a
that's
mother.
it.
Yeah, the way that our bodies are designed, it's truly for reproduction. Like that's why when we shut down our reproduction system through birth control and other medications, our medical system has advanced to a point where we can just shut down our
Yeah,
cycles. And it's an unnatural way of doing things. Like when you try to push things that are unnatural, whether it be that in architecture or in life, like there are going to be side effects and there will be things that will sort of crumble and struggle for it. And I'm sure you guys see it as well. But yeah, and it's the female body is designed for reproduction. We should definitely love our reproductive organs. We shouldn't shut it down. But whether you want to have a baby or not, it's
that's it.
completely
Yeah.
irrelevant. Like you can absolutely have one or the other stage, and both are okay, regardless what the society tells you.
Yeah. And now talking about patriarchy.
Which is the background in our every
Is it?
conversation.
Because it's easier to have this conversation between women. Not easier, but yes, sometimes. And it's comforting to have this conversation between ourselves, but it's like, how then do you transform this as a way to transform your support system, because you're not alone. I mean, there are always people around you, your friends, your family, your
boss.
co-workers, your bosses, etc. So it's because once you are comfortable in your period, in your body, how do you get some way the changes also in your environment? That's a big question, because as we were saying, the world is not so welcoming to our
Yeah.
bodies at this moment.
So as far as like other people, we certainly don't exist alone, as you said, and women's health issues are really not just the women's issues, it's everyone's issues, because women are 50% of the population, and every man has a woman in his life that he loves, whether it's a mother or a girlfriend or a sister, friends, like they're just simply surrounded by it. And really for men become allies in this is the most sort of important thing, specifically in my field. And interestingly enough, men are interested in this sort of stuff. They don't want to turn away from it. Because it's a perfect example. When I've done my TED talk, at the end of it, I had a lineup of people to come and talk to me about the talk and just how much it changed for them. But most of those people were men. And I literally had a huge lineup of men coming up and talking to me and being like, oh my gosh, you really helped me understand my girlfriend, my partner, my mother. And I've never thought that this is going on. And as women, it is on us to really understand our bodies, because we can't really teach men that if we don't understand our bodies. The things that we can tell men is, when we don't understand our bodies, is like, so annoying, I hate my period, I'm moody. And then we sort of give this message to them that, oh, the woman is just hormonal, she's on her period. And we've got so many memes that are talking about like, oh, my girl is on my period. But we have equal amount of memes and equal amount of men that are very interested in this topic. And like my TED talk was a perfect example of it. And also, like, my partner and my best friend are both males, and they understand my cycle probably better than some women understand their cycle, because I talk about it so much. But it really does come from us. And I think it's like, it's welcoming them on the conversation without sort of forcing that agenda, because we definitely love to force things. And female way is also very sort of attracting and forcing it. And we all know those women that are like confident, stand in their power, able to talk to them, like they magnetic. And the way that we become that is we just get comfortable in our bodies and not shy away from these conversations, because men are curious, because men really want to know those things, and really inviting them on these conversations, answering questions, and sort of, and even just sharing your experiences, it really does it really does open up a conversation. And I think it's really just having these open conversations and being like, this is what I'm experiencing, and then allowing for the questions to come in, because it will, and men want to know. Like from my experience, they really, really want to know this information if we present it to them in a way that open and honest, rather than this dreadful hormonal thing. Hmm.
There's a way forward.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah, definitely.
So, as the last question, we wanted to ask you how you would wish that your work would impact maybe your daughter, if you have a daughter, or the next generation of women, and how they feel about their period, about their bodies, and aging, all of that.
Yeah.
How's your ideal? How would that look like?
I love that question. So I do think that sort of when I started this work about 4 5 years ago, like we didn't quite talk about periods, but we're talking about more and more and more. And social media is certainly a big proponent to it, and it really allows us to have more open conversations about our bodies. And I would just love for girls to be educated about these things earlier, and so that way, as we get our periods, that we're already equipped, that we're not immediately sent to shut down our hormones through birth control, but rather really understanding our bodies. So I do want, ideally, this information getting earlier, because I learned about this like really in about sort of 30s, late 20s. And I think, have I known about it before then, things would have been it would have just been so many years of less wasted time, because I've recently did a math on periods. So for a woman, it's typically a very standard to get a painful periods. So if you have painful periods for like 4 to 5 days, you have periods for about 41 years. When we calculate all of those days, it comes to about 7 years of living with periods on pain. And then if we calculate PMS, which used to be so dreadful for me, just like really pissed off, annoyed, and bloated, that's like another 4 or 5 days. So it's another 7 years. So when
Wow.
I've done sort of all the calculation, that is 14 years of just complete distraught and dreadfulness for so many women.
Wow.
And 14 years is a lot of years to just be
Yeah.
like, to just be dreading things. It's just so unpleasant. And I think if we, as women, were collectively able to get an extra 14 years, just imagine what we could possibly achieve. We still do. And like, there is loads of things that say that whatever men can do, women can do bleeding. And it's true. Like, we can push through it, but we also don't have to push through it. We can really respect our bodies, and we can really just allow them to flow through it and have the exact amount of predictability, but more on a cyclical way rather than daily push grind of productivity, because that's how we designed to be. And I wish that now that one of the things that we do see quite a bit is problems with things like fertility, infertility, I should say, and many things with women are getting into puberty at like as early as 10, 9 years, but back in the day it was 14 years. So these things are, we live our bodies. There are a lot of chemicals and sort of the things that we spray on our food, the way that we disrespect the earth, the soil. It really has a massive effect on female hormones in particular, for simple reason that a lot of the chemicals from the outside get stuck to the female body, because we have naturally higher fat tissue, because that's what helps us ovulate, helps us have periods. So because women have higher fat tissue, we absorb a lot of the chemicals so much more. So I do wish that we just become aware of how all these external things affect our bodies. So not only do we respect our bodies as we go through, we also know how to protect our female bodies, so that way we get to thrive in our bodies for longer, with more time, feeling better, because women are the foundation of every community, of every family. Like it's usually 90% of the more than 90% of the time it's going to be women. So when women feel amazing, everyone wins. And I do hope that with my work, we're able to really share with more women the understanding about their body, because that is the first step to be able to take care of yourself. There's a very prolonged answer to what you said, but
It was
that's the things
beautiful.
that that's the thing that I hope for the most.
We hope so too.
Oh,
That
yes,
this is
same.
Yeah,
We are talking about it. Don't worry. If it's just that, we
amazing.
talk
And you
about
girls
it.
are girls in the architectural field. I love that. So we can
yeah.
definitely
Yeah.
make places much more interesting.
One day we will do a project on this.
One day, it's from
Definitely.
today.
Yeah.
I mean, already talking
Hmm.
about it, as you were
Yes.
saying, it's already a project in itself. So,
Yeah. It's a
Yeah,
start.
yeah,
Definitely.
it's the
exactly.
start for
I love that.
everything.
Thank you. Wow, Dinara, this was amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. Like
I had so many.
moments. Thank you.
Thank
Really, it was very educational, but also like your storytelling is amazing. We got educated at the same time. Like
Yeah.
all of it in one talk. Thank you so
Fantastic.
much.
Yes, thank you for having me on. I think I love talking about architecture and periods. Who would have
Yeah,
thought?
I mean, yeah, from now on.
A
We're
new
gonna have a
passion.
series.
Hola. I
Oh, why
know. I
not?
love that.
That would
Thank
be cool. And if you want to share anything else, and also share where people can follow you, follow your work, if
Yeah.
they want to
Well,
reach.
if you're sort of interested in periods or maybe hormones, and maybe you had some other questions about hormonal things, I mentioned since you're listening to this on a podcast, I do have a podcast called Feel Better, Be Better, where I talk a lot about menstrual health and I bring some really interesting guests that often talk about these topics that we get a chance to talk about. And I'll also, if anybody's struggling with things like low energy, mood swings, PMS, oftentimes it's kind of easier to understand where it comes from so you can address it. So I'm happy to give you listeners a free hormone quiz that I've created specifically so women can look at their symptoms and see which ones maybe they're struggling with. So it kind of give them a bit of answer to both talk to their doctors or of course if they have questions, reach out to me. And I'm very active both on LinkedIn and on Instagram, which is my name, dinara.mukh. So if you do have any questions, I am always happy to answer them.
Great.
This was
Thank you.
great. We're
Thank
so
you very
happy.
much.
Thank you for joining, and we might reach out to you another
Yeah.
time.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for having me on.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Bye.
You too.
Bye.